So let's just say that the post-Great Recession job situation is absolutely gack recently. In the UK, about 7 million workers are employed in very precarious work situations, 2.5 million are employed in online work platforms like Uber, and about 1 million people are on 0 hours contracts, so yeah, it's pretty shit. Other things are really just getting quite rocky. The lack of jobs has led to a skyrocketing in food banks under the Tories, say hello to capitalist breadlines, and rough sleepers have increased by over 50% in just a few years. In other words, our welfare system is just not coping well enough with our worldwide globalized economy. So when we talk about UBI, most of us are understandably ecstatic, and rightly so. UBI will provide a greater freedom for workers. You won't need to do dingy jobs, it will incentivize automation for those careers, and people will be able to pursue more interesting routes. But it will also be a sort of payment for those who do home and reproductive labour, and many even consider this to be a capitalist shortcut to communism. But there is a darker side to UBI that is just not touched on that much, and no, I'm not talking about the libertarian Red Scare rhetoric. So let's just call this universal basic income a critique. Firstly, let's remind ourselves of where the ideas of basic income came from. It is true that this policy can be loved by both the left and the right, but love from very different perspectives. Whilst it has its roots in, well, like most things, Greece, it was postulated in a more modern sense in between and after the war, but its intentions here were for stability, not progress. With the fear of communist infiltration and the expansion of labour unionisation, basic income was thought of as a method of preserving the status quo. Later, one of the most famous examples of this was postulated by the late Milton Friedman in the form of a negative income tax. The basic premise? It's a flat tax system but with universal credit. Therefore, low-income earners don't technically pay anything in tax until they reach a certain level, because they're supplemented by credit. Therefore, the incentives of people will always be towards making more money without tax burdens. Friedman's reasoning for this was the belief that charity is the #1 solution to society's ills under capitalism, and not social safety nets. Therefore, negative income tax would create a self-reliant taxpayer, through the gradual elimination of social services to be replaced by private ventures due to people's larger amount of wealth. Friedman's belief in this go back to the Victorian era of capitalism and beyond, where the so-called lodge practice, amongst other institutions, provided for the poor rather than the state.
You know that in the 19th century they sold insurance against poverty? They were mutual aid societies where we would all get together and buy insurance, in a sense insuring all of us.
This is in many ways a deeply ingrained myth of sorts. It's true that this did happen in some avenues, but there's a reason they were gotten rid of. Most practices were of poor standard. You could only receive benefits if you were a member of an institution, you had to be of a certain age, usually you wouldn't get life-saving procedures, and this wouldn't always apply to families or unemployed people either. If you compare this with 70 years of the NHS, it's night and day. But it gets even darker. Friedman also questioned whether or not people who only had the income grant should be allowed to vote. Seeing as if they were allowed to do so, they would obviously vote for more money towards their pockets instead of bootstrapping themselves out of poverty. This, along with the destruction of public services, really spells a more disturbing and anti-progressive nature upon basic income. We together have fought, not necessarily voted, for measures that have improved our ways of life. Minimum wages, healthcare, council housing, and free and open education. I fear that if this is indeed the strong lineage of what basic income has wanted, I'm personally a skeptic. Bear in mind, folks, the companies of today will become the automated firm holders of tomorrow. They're still going to be in charge, and they're still going to be deciding things. It's all well and good thinking that UBI will be the ignition key towards Star Trek superabundance, but it's really not the case when you still got people in the same societal roles as we see today. Not much has changed, just everybody has a bit more dosh in their pockets. It is true that Western countries have had plenty of plans set up to make sure that we're not all strung out on the streets. The National Health Service is a shining example. Surely then, if we oppose UBI as it's against our interests, the NHS is also something that we ought to oppose. There is a problem with this. The health service is a state-based solution, free access at the point of use. UBI, on the other hand, is a market-based solution. Now, the two do not oftenly swing hand in hand. On the one hand, you've got something that guarantees money to be used in the economy. On the other hand, you've got something that provides people with basic essentials, such as education and healthcare. Now, markets are not a good thing to go down. Most of the time, they're a pretty big no-no. The reason why is they're very easy to be swept up by opportunists whenever the price is right, simply because the profit motive is still used in the economy. Now, I don't think that this is what the left should be about. A lot of centrist types have got it in their head, quite understandably, that the left is about equal distribution of wealth, but that's really not what the legacy has stood for. It should instead, as it has indeed always been about, ownership, control, and democracy. I know it might sound odd to some, but might I say that one of the biggest myths we've ever been told is that the greatest freedom is freedom to choose. Because at the end of the day, what are you really choosing in day-to-day examples of this? Very little choice that would actually affect society as a whole. What does give us a greater ability to actualize our freedoms is waking up with a broken ankle and knowing that you won't have 100 doctor's bills to pay by the end of the month. You know, for me and my friends' experiences in the gig economy, UBI is basically falling in line with common neoliberal principles, shifting all the burden onto someone else. Now, you may find that silly, but believe me, you'll wake up someday and find that your wage job as a barista has now turned into a piecework job with concessions and no labour laws. Let's not also forget that reforms are destined to be altered depending upon economic highs and lows. The health service in my country is in shark-infested waters right now. That's not even including benefits, pensions and higher education. They're all coming tumbling down due to the swinging pendulums of bureaucracy. We can't just think that this will be the end of our immediate worries. It won't. It's subject to massive attacks and corruption. Instead, we've got to think deeper. Now, a common rebuttal to this critique is that we can just introduce measures to prevent it, but I've yet to actually find many substantiated ways of solving this. All I tend to find is measures will need to be enacted, protection policies will need to be enacted, humane policies will need to be enacted. If we want this to work for us, there needs to be actual, clear, thought-out and analysed ways in which this can be done, rather than just an appeal to policy reform. Remember, it should come as a warning sign when some of the richest men in the room are advocating this apparent for-the-people deal. Many of them are wanting UBI in order to take down social services and improve their own game. And just because you don't want them to, they do. And they have a lot more influence than you do. Bargaining power is one of the key ways workers hold on to their gains. United we bargain, divided we beg. By taking the emphasis off a large amount of people's role in production, distribution, sale of goods, you're removing a tremendous degree of that bargaining power, which is surely not in our interests. It's all well and good to think of austerity as simply some ideological problem, but it's really not. It's a very understandable thing to do from the viewpoint of those who stand to lose a lot of money and influence. Let's use a similar example and work this out. What if we made it by law that every single person had to have a job? 100% employment. No excuses. The boss, and the firm for that matter, would lose an enormous amount of power over its workforce. Because in normal working conditions, firms just fire employees if they aren't needed or if they go out of line. But now, unless there's a position available elsewhere, firing would not be an option. As of such, there is no longer a power dynamic between the two groups, but the boss still controls the firm. So, this is not a good solution for those in charge, which is why if it ever were to be implemented for any reason, there would need to be a lot of concessions for the business owner in other forms. Now, even if these demands were possible to be reached and maintained, I think that they would come at huge costs. History lesson: Britain actually founded its welfare system from exploiting tin and copper reserves in Southeast Asia. I can only imagine that a largely pacified and okay with what they got generation could open the floodgates to untold amounts of misery in the third world. We need more democracy, not more money. One argument is that UBI will allow us to pursue further endeavours. People who might want to learn a trade, but don't have the time nor the monetary ability, would now be allowed to do so. This would extend our ability to express ourselves and innovate to a spectacular degree. And to the budding revolutionary, the opportunity to organise for a greater tomorrow. But alas, let's remember, a market is a market is a market. The firms are still in the interest of making a profit. Remember that graph about productivity being 3 times higher than what workers on average are paid? Who's to say that similar things won't ring true for UBI? The proposed basic income in Switzerland was 24k. I could and have lived happily on half of that, but not in a land where coffee is 7 francs each. We may find ourselves still needing to find some work, but because it's not as necessary anymore, wages are going to tank. As time goes on, basic income will need to be increased in order to cover costs, and after a while we'll be seeing the old age argument about how we can't raise this policy because if we do then the cost of goods will just increase further and further. Insecurity may well foster. Bear in mind, I am under no impression that UBI is going to make us lazy. Far from it. What I'm interested in is whether or not UBI is going to prevent precarity, the daily grind that each and every one of us holds upon our shoulders. Now, I do want people to be getting out there. I do want people to have more free time to organise, to explore more things, to research more. We are not in a good position to be doing that when we come home after an 8-hour day and knowing that we'll be doing the same thing tomorrow. But in order to get my point across of my criticisms towards this idea, without using the M word again, I'm gonna have to break Godwin's law. Ready? During the Nazi regime, the country enacted a program called Strength Through Joy. It was a system designed on paper to create strength through their occupations and joy through their leisure time. But there was a twist. Its actual purpose was to provide people with a plethora of leisurely activities so they could take their mind off anything politically destructive and influence the regime's status quo. I'm not saying, by the way, that this is our future, no, far from it, but I just want people to bear in mind, once again, this is not in our hands. Markets find ways of solving issues in ways that we simply cannot predict. Will UBI lead us to take ventures beyond capitalism, or will markets find routes about keeping us on the straight and narrow? Our goal towards a better society is surely free access as opposed to free to choose. This is not going to benefit our progress towards that ideal at all. And I must say, I find myself in a funny predicament. In my pursuit to eliminate the need for work, I'm ironically defending work, at least for the time being, because I fear about what will come if we give up our one piece of bargaining power. It's worth noting, of course, that the theoretical basic income can work. The money is there's plenty of it. But the problem is, our incentives in this economy are based around our current one. As of such, it's the structures of the economy that need to change, not more duct tape. UBI is a band-aid for capitalism, it is not a transitionary apparatus for socialism. I tend to have 2 points for realistic working solutions to society's problems that might well be universal. Number 1, if it sounds annoying. Number 2, if it doesn't fit in a 140-character tweet. Now, I know how irksome it is not being able to have this saving grace that will help us all, but unfortunately it appears right now that the only practical solution that will fall in our interests would be stronger unionization and opposition to innovation. But there are huge hurdles to this. For one, we've tried this in the past and it never went down too well, even when union membership was vapidly higher than it is today. I also just can't see a large enough of the first world opposing innovation when we simply love it so much. Not to mention, as I've said, it's well within the interests of firms to automate. My feeling is, as time goes on, businesses are going to realise that there aren't enough people with money to spend, and there aren't enough bullshit jobs being created. Thus, UBI will have to be implemented to further the markets, but it won't be in our control, and this is the big problem. The truth of the matter is, I'm not sure what the solution could be to our problems. Perhaps, as some union guys have said, redistributing work for the time being as opposed to wealth. This would in doing so eliminate a lot of the so-called bullshit jobs. What we as people should be aiming for right now is economic power, as opposed to more money. It doesn't matter how much money you have if it can all be changed by the fluctuations of the markets or the will of the bureaucrats. Easy fix solutions to complex problems are never a good route to go down. So, too long didn't read. My basic point here is that UBI is going to have to be implemented at some point in the future for the sake of preserving markets. The problem, of course, is it's not going to be in our control. But if it was in our control, well, why would you want to stop there? So it's that time again, folks. I'd like to say thank you to all of my patrons, and in addition to the ones going down the left-hand side of the screen, I'd like to say a special thank you to Comrade King, Failure First, The Fatuous Pauper, Henry M. Longstaff, Jake Zydek, Jaden Kirby, Matos, Ryan William Cox, Stephen Price, Tom Hatt, and Zachary Dijon. That's a really cool name, by the way. So thank you very much, guys, and just to let you know, this video might not be entirely accurate. I mean, I may have gotten plenty of my facts wrong, but I'm just offering what I can as a little bit of a critique to this idea that a lot of people are getting behind, and I just don't think that it's entirely in our interest. So, yeah, what do you think? Type in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.